Good morning or good afternoon or even good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief, CEO of Media Ops, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal. And actually, we're going to be touching on all three of those areas in what I hope is a great webinar today with a great practitioner story who's going to give us some really good look at how we leverage Kubernetes to operationalize container security in a large organization. Let me introduce you to our webinar participants today before we go any further. First of all, the gentleman on the, well, depending on if you're looking at the slide, to me it's the left-hand corner of the slide. We have Michael Basil. Is it Basil or Basil, Michael?
Basil.
Basil. Michael's with SAP and he's an enterprise systems engineer. And Michael, welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then, well, it's to my right, I assume it's probably to your right as well, an old friend of mine, Michelle McLean, like McLean, Virginia McLean, I always remind myself, VP of Marketing. VP of Marketing from StackRox. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. Super happy to be with you guys today.
Yeah, I don't think you and I have ever done too many discussions together, Michelle, in the 15 years that we've known each other, or maybe more.
We did some podcasts back in the day, but it's been a while.
We certainly have, but it's a pleasure to have you on. So, guys, before we get further, Michael, Michelle, I'm going to give each of you to kind of introduce yourselves with your background to our audience. Michelle, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Sure. So I'm a serial tech startup kind of person. So this is my 7th startup, and I started my career like Alan as a journalist and an analyst. And you know, the waves of technology as they come through just keeps me super interested and super involved. And quick snapshot on StackRox, it really sits at the intersection of two big trends, right? The whole move to microservices, containers, and Kubernetes, along with how we're going to go secure that cloud native stack. And I'm sure we'll share some more about that as we go.
Thank you. Michael, how about you?
Sure. So I guess I'd call myself a serial DevOps cultural leader through different nonprofits. And as that has progressed, I've evolved into the enterprise with a clear focus on cloud migrations, getting to a cloud mindset, cloud native security, and really focusing on, you know, the very unique needs of enterprise customer bases and what they care about and how to deliver that in a way that, you know, drives them forward and is in a very secure, business efficient way.
Great. All right, let me just take care of a little housekeeping before we dive right in here. For those of you watching at home or in your office, you probably, depending on your platform, you probably have the GoToWebinar control panel maybe in the top right-hand corner of your screen. And I just want to call your attention to a couple of things about how we do things here at DevOps.com and Container Journal Security Boulevard. We really want to have an interactive session today. This isn't just some slideshow. In fact, the slide you see right now is going to disappear shortly. It's just going to be Michael, Michelle, and I talking the rest of the time. We want your interaction. We want your questions. We want your comments, your feedback. If you look at your control panel from GoToWebinar, you'll see there's a section there marked questions. You can type your questions in real time as they pop into your head. They'll be queued, they're saved, we'll be able to get to them at the appropriate time. And even if for some reason we aren't able to get to them, at least we have a record of it and we can maybe contact you offline or reach out to you with answers to your questions. So happy to do that. If, however, you're having any technical problems, maybe audio's going in and out, video's choppy, whatever it is, but you can still get to the chat section at the bottom of your webinar. We do have engineers standing by to help you with that. And if you can put it in there, one of our folks will reach out and try to get it right to you so that you maximize what you get out of today's webinar. So with that being said, we're going to dive right in. And as I mentioned, I am going to end the slides. It's just one slide. And let's talk a little bit now about Kubernetes and security. Michael, I guess the threshold question is, we don't worry about Kubernetes security if we're not using Kubernetes, right? So I'm going to take a leap of faith here that SAP, is involved in using Kubernetes in your environment. Why? What was the driving force? What made you guys decide to,
Sure.
Kubernetes?
I think when a corporation kind of makes a decision to make a strategic push, you have to look at, how is this going? Is this mapped into the value stream that's important to my clients? Or my customers. So when we look at, and I've done this at multiple organizations, we've looked at, Kubernetes versus, specific hyperscaler. Are there on-prem hybrid needs? So for a corp, like SAP or like Macmillan or other places that I've been at recently, the unique needs of data privacy, data security, plus more importantly or equally important, the agility to be able to move across the different hyperscalers and on-prem for specific workloads, and then really having something that's going to be rock solid, a strong community behind it, all driving towards getting to a high quality, highly secure alignment to getting the workloads to compute, disk, and I/O. So when I think of Kubernetes, I think it's a big step forward into commoditizing the hyperscalers and on-prem data centers that still exist and will for some time based on the workload needs.
Yep. Michael, if you can, and of course we're not going to ask you to share with the audience anything of a confidential nature. It's the last thing we want. But can you give us sort of a timeline of this Kubernetes transition at SAP?
I think it would be in alignment with, if you look at Kubernetes versus Docker Swarm and the container wave that happened, Drew, it's great. We're going to containerize these workloads. Terrific. It works on my machine. Developers are so excited, and then you get these, the Docker hub, Docker and all that stuff. But really, orchestration was, there was a war, there was a battle, and as the Cloud Native Compute Foundation started getting its legs, that's something we're a platinum partner of, if memory serves. We have Gartner is one of our projects up there that is an overlay or orchestrator or some type of inventory or inceptor across the hyperscalers and on-prem. So I think it grew organically with when it became clear that Kubernetes was the front runner and where the community is really, the bulk of the community is really aligned. So I think our timeline mirrors that of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation and its pushes.
Excellent. All right. So I think we've kind of, Michelle, the nice thing about having you here is Michael represents one use experience at SAP, where the beauty of having a StackRox person is you get to talk to dozens of organizations like SAP that are have instituted Kubernetes, are rolling it out, and then have to once they cross that threshold, the next sort of threshold is, oh my goodness, we need to secure this. We can't use yesterday's tools.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen is customers really go through two waves here. And Michael really touched on this, right? Starting at the container level, where that was kind of your focal point. And a lot of customers were doing what Michael said, right? Individual developers spinning up projects. And I think that people recognize right with that first wave that that's a massive change to the security infrastructure, right? A lot of old tools aren't going to work in this world, and boy, they come and go, and that's kind of scary. But there's also some really nice, rich capabilities in the infrastructure. The whole notion of immutable declarative infrastructure can certainly increase security, right? And so I think people recognize this dichotomy pretty quickly. Like on the one hand, new attack surface, broader attack surface. On the other hand, more inherent security capabilities. What we're just beginning to see now is sort of the second wave, like Michael talked about. You get to a certain scale, you get to a certain volume, you're doing enough business critical stuff that you need to do orchestration along with containers, right? You need the automation, you need the scalability, you need the controls, you need a whole bunch of stuff to really make this serve your business. And I think what people have been a little slower in seeing is that also drives another parallel shift in security. So just like we needed to change security to take care of containers, we also need to change security to encompass everything with Kubernetes. And you have the same dichotomy, a whole bunch of great information that you can leverage, all this declarative information that you can learn from deployments and clusters. At the same time, you again have this broader attack surface. And you have in Kubernetes the reality that while it has a lot of inherent controls, they're not on by default, because it's first and foremost a developer's tools, right? And so it's all about enabling fast iteration, enabling people to move really quickly. So when CNCF brings out a new edition of Kubernetes and they say there's X, Y, and Z in new security capabilities in it, they're never on, right? Because if they brought them on, it would break everything that was in existing deployment, right? You wouldn't maintain backward compatibility. So the real challenge for Michael in his kind of role, or for organizations like that we see over and over again, is understanding what's available in Coop, understanding how to set it up correctly, and then putting in the right mechanisms to protect the broader attack surface and leverage all the rich information coming from Coop.
Excellent. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to add my 2 cents. I can't help myself. So I view it as there's a 3-stage process here. The first stage that both you and Michael alluded to me is akin to sort of the shadow IT thing we went through with cloud when cloud first came out, which was, a lot of developers kind of not skunkworks, but just not bothering to go through normal, regular channels, throwing it on their credit card or whatever. And so you had this whole shadow IT thing of people with instances spinning up. In this case, it's containers spinning up that existed sort of outside of our regular IT governance, if you will, right? And I don't mean governance in terms of GRT, but just normal management. And then, and that's always that immature stage. Then you reach a bit of a maturity stage where we say, hey, that can't be having this. Can't have 1,000 different people doing 1,000 different things like that. We're going to try to normalize it, and we're going to bring it under our, CIO and our IT team's umbrella. And then I think the realization is, oh my goodness, we've got something new here, right? That the old stuff doesn't work with. And then, Michelle, as you mentioned, is the evolved state, right? Like we move from Neanderthal, from hominid to Neanderthal to Homo sapien, right? Where, well, we now have to orchestrate this. And in orchestration, we have a greater opportunity to do something a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit richer in things like securing it, right? And certainly even, that first generation of Neanderthal container security, let's call it, gives way to, modern, I don't know if we're in modern yet, but, Homo sapien security, if you will.
We definitely see that wave. You can look at a couple of quick examples and see the difference, right? So what have we always worried about? We've always worried about things like vulnerability management, config management. We know we have to do this. We know it's crucial to getting things right, both at the container level and the kube level. And those two are 2 simple ways to see the difference between first generation and second generation. Yep. If I'm worried about vul management and I have a container-centric point of view, then I'm thinking about vulnerabilities in images. And I'm thinking about where those images might be deployed and running, and I need to find those vulnerabilities in a running deployment. fine. But, think about the raft of Kube vulnerabilities that came to light just in the past like 10 months or so, right? Everything with API exposure, the first major DOS attack on, or potential, right, for DOS attacks on the API server, the run C vulnerability, which was related to the API server, even down to like 2 weeks ago, billion laughs attack, right? The ability to compromise the resources and take over all those resources. So, it's not enough to look for container vulnerabilities. One must also look for Kube vulnerabilities. And then similarly with config management, you have to get your containers configured right, but you really also have to get Kube configured right? If we think about the exploit against Tesla with crypto mining, right? That was an exposed dashboard. So you need to, is my RBAC set up right? Is my dashboard exposed? Is any metadata exposed? You also need to be thinking about the config of Kube, not just containers.
Can I get a
Michael,
comment?
you're the star here, man. Let's hear from you.
So I like everything Michelle said, and I think when I come onto a new engagement, whatever my employment situation is, and how we do that as a technical consultant or on staff, I start to see where their mindset is at. So if I bring on a Pixel book or a Chromebook and stick it in front of some of the team and go, is this secure? And they say, no, because it doesn't have antivirus, then I know where I'm at. That's my litmus test. I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to talk through this. Because what that suggests is probably someone who's done a really good job of creating layered onion, the metaphor is like an onion versus like an eggshell. In the world they understand, and for them to keep driving the organization forward on their own, I feel like the mindset has to open up to, what am I actually trying to secure? How does this system work? And these technologies can be viewed as just, oh, this is just the new thing. Well, it is new, and it's a seismic shift, and we've probably been here before if you've, depending on how much in certain architecture structures, depending on how long your tooth is, you've been in the industry. But right now, all this stuff is coming back around with evolution. So the mindset of so that's my phase 0. If you had 2 phases or 3, I don't know how many I would have, but phase 0 is, first, let's see where the mindset is, get them to open up. This might be a new thing. And then all the the desires and the expertise can be evolved and reapplied. And what our goal then is, we end up having kind of like we call it like a traditional or classic infrastructure, and then the Kubernetes infrastructure or the next gen infrastructure, getting the engineers to live in both worlds and be able to flip their mindsets or bring best thought process both ways. So we actually find our traditional security starting to improve, in spots, just from having the critical thinking exercise of securing something that is behaviorally and systematically has significant differences.
Makes sense. When you're saying it now, Michael, it's almost obvious. Let's dive into a little specifics with SAP and your own journey here with this then. We've spoken about this multiple phases.
Mm-hmm.
Walk us through kind of what were the easy, obvious things in each phase, but also, if you can, give us some of the gotchas. Give us some of the ones where, man, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have done that differently.
Yeah, sure. So, getting a proof of concept workload running in a hyperscaler on Kubernetes, not that hard, right? Understanding, then when you get into, all right, how secure, and you try to use like legacy or current gen or classic security testing tools and things like that, and they operate differently. You're going through another layer through the hyperscaler, so we get unpredictable results, for example, just because the pathways through third-party networks are in play. So you got to, you're reading these dials, and they're not, not telling you the same thing. You work through some of that. The gotchas are always, you're always coming in too late with security, or as much as you want to be proactive, But the huge one is, the business has an appetite. They want to sell. The customers want it. We want to implement it. We're the engineers, closest to the fire, on the build out. And compliance and contracts, really like getting through the conversation, because you're not just getting the mindset of all the new things that come up within your team, but then how these controls and audits are even interpreted by the third party security groups, getting through those conversations. They're never starting early enough. So I take it back, the biggest gotcha is not following or not being rigorous enough or having a wide enough view on working in a true DevOps model where everyone's at the table, at least minimally required, early enough in the conversation. So you're feeding in groups later, QA, production support, and it's like it just slows everything down, because there's this it's just like a drain. It's like feels like an anchor at first, and then you get far along and you just get hit in the face with, well, we're in the shift left model, and it's like, well, that that has to survive some other compensating security approach, like an image scanner or things like that. So the lack of the holistic view going in, it might just be part of the journey. We kind of know where we should probably start out, but getting alignment on a North Star, even if it's fuzzy for the multiple groups, getting everybody rowing in the same direction. The people aspect is number one. The process quality, like going through this, every dysfunction, every band-aid that you've done in the past will be exposed. And so you're not just kind of building for the future, but you're also having to triage, or triage might be the wrong word, but you're going to have to pay down some technical debt, and it might feel like a balloon payment at some point is due. And so you're always kind of racing forward and then going back, and you're just kind of working through it. So there can be a lot of dissonance in the system for some time.
Got it. Michael, we realize StackRox, of course, sponsors today's webinar. We thank them for it. Michelle is here. So I guess we can't talk bad about that. But in all honesty, talk to us about what drove you here to look at a StackRox type of solution to help with your Kubernetes security.
Sure. So I think StackRox, when I look across the security landscape, I think StackRox, and this is my opinion, right? So I'm expressing my opinion when I look at it.
Obviously, yes.
StackRox has a viewpoint or perspective that makes sense to me. It's how I think about it. So when I think of that egg, there's a yolk in there, or there's a center of that onion. I want to make sure there's something focused holistically on the system from that lens, and not saying, okay, we do container security, and it also ingests this data from the Kubernetes orchestrator. Nope, that's not how I think about it. It needs to live inside that thing, and that is the first class citizen, because that to me is where all the behaviors can be put together. So it's like the amount of data in your solution is less important than the quality and the signal of that data lake, right? And you can add on more and more, and there's other perspectives that I think are important as well. Like at the hyperscaler level, I like Google Security Command Center. I think is a very good product with the direction, and where I want to get to is like when you talk to a group like StackRox, it's like, listen, I know there's all these CVEs and all this well-known stuff, but we're gonna get, I feel like sometimes our approach can be, let's plug all the holes we know about, and I don't think that is going to be optimal, especially as we get further along this evolution. Okay, the threat actors are being more and more sophisticated, so you're not just going to be able to plug those. You're going to be able to manipulate, and they're doing it now, manipulate the systems to get the behavior they want that isn't going to tie into a single, there's chain attacks and all kinds of different things, getting more and more sophisticated. So the more you can get machine learning and behavioral analytics to flag there is a behavior happening that looks like a breach. Might not be a breach, but you're going to have to assume, if you haven't already, that people are inside your network. So I love Google and Coca-Cola when they talk about a beyond corp model, and they live that. And so it forces a level of rigor and focus to really admit that that shell or wall, or however you want to consider it, is just one layer. And it doesn't mean the next layer back can be less secure. It has to be as much or more secure. And so, you're layering, and you've got dimensions and focal points that you want to shine a light on the system from different things. So I don't think you illuminate an office with one light. You have to have this all coming, from all different angles and bouncing off and this and that. So I look at StackRox as their focus. Their focus on Kubernetes as a strength. Their company hasn't been around for 100 years. So, when you start from that, like, what's your core? I think the core makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, Michelle, I'll give you a chance before I chime in. Is what Michael described sort of the typical customer experience here, or kind of driving anything?
I think that he makes several good points, right? And there are several things you need to protect against. So there are the known things, and you should plug all those holes, right? If we think about this stack, a lot of the incidents we're going to have, it's not going to be different than the last 20 or 30 years, where many of the challenges we face and many of the sources of a problem are something human based, right? There's a lot of knobs and dials, and there's a lot of things to set right, and you might miss something. So having a set of systems that looks for those known things, I think, is important. But Michael's also right in that once you do all those, and that's a fair bit of energy, and you want some tooling to help with that, especially since developers are so focused on go, iterate, push code. Having some guardrails, like, did they build these things the right way? Yeah, go get those checks. That's a good idea. That's part of what StackRox provides, for example. But Michael's exactly right that it's going to be the stuff you're not expecting. Things are going to change all the time. And this is, in part, a beautiful thing with the infrastructure that we're dealing with containers and Coop. Because it's declarative infrastructure, because we know what it's supposed to be doing, and because every little thing is supposed to be doing only kind of one thing, anomaly detection is actually easier than it's ever been. We can be more certain that we're seeing something different. And even if we don't know for sure that different is bad, like Michael said, if we think this is a breach, we're not sure if this is a breach, at least being able to be certain that something is off. And if you want to take the approach that says, if you see an anomaly, just go ahead and kill that container, because I'll just go spin up another one. That's something that's reasonable in this cloud stack. You can be more aggressive in your security. Just kill the pod, because I'll just go make another one. So I think that there's a lot to be done to get at what Michael's saying, which is to be more confident that something is off and take decisive action against it to protect yourself. But I think all of that follows a whole set of build it right? And there's a lot to learn for a lot of organizations there.
Right. So I wanted to pinpoint one thing. So you reminded me. So one of my core mantras is that we're going to have an ephemeral infrastructure, right? So the shorter I can make everything live, the more and more the little cheats that people do. Like anytime I can get people their hands out of the machine, this a concept of you're never going to log into this thing. Like, they're like, what? It's just like the observability works differently. It's like you're never going in. And so they're like, well, I need to go in. Like, well, you have to figure out how not to need to go in. And so you can eliminate a lot of the the rigor holes, I would say, or however you want to describe that, by kind of just cleaning things up all the time. If something doesn't run, if you're really getting ahead of it, your stuff doesn't run that long. I mean, you're going to have long, data storage and things like that, but your application services and things like that, those are very ephemeral, and those don't live long, and it becomes I mean, the old metaphor is fine. It's cattle, not pets. It's more like robotic cattle or something like that. But that part of the mindset of the rigor is just as important, and the improvisation, putting the groups in a position where they can make improvisational decisions about what is allowable, versus just hoping that, well, we got everything locked down. How much observability does the typical, I'm not talking about SAP, but as a typical mid-range enterprise, how much can they really see? How well are they seeing it? Versus what they think they can see? And these are, when you need to go in and audit yourself and look at cloud native scoring rubrics, I'm a big fan of, and not just having one person do that, but have the group go through it. These are Socratic questions in my view, and really score it as a group. And you'll find that the groups, even small groups, they'll be honest about where it's at, and then they'll clean up the holes that they know are there. So
it reminds me, I saw a diagram the other day. So it had, practitioners, managers, C-levels, and then next to it was the percentage of problems that they're aware of within the organization. The practitioners had 100% visibility into all the problems.
yeah.
The managers had about 40%, and the C-level people had about 4%. So if you want to find out what really is going on, you got to get down there and talk to the practitioners. But on this question of immutable infrastructure, though, one of the things I will say, when I first was exposed to the whole container thing, and even before Kubernetes kind of won the orchestration wars, if you will, the idea of immutable infrastructure, being able, as you, Michelle, said, to, hey man, I think it may smell bad. I'm just gonna spin up another one. I thought that was a no-brainer, right? I thought that was such an obvious thing to do. Why wouldn't everyone do it? But in my interviews with, organizations around the world using Kubernetes and containers, I find that that's more the exception than the rule, unfortunately, is that people just don't like, they don't, they'd rather sit there and try to fix something that may be broke. And I'm wondering, is that
It's
strictly a
hard.
cultural thing, or, Michael?
It's hard. It's hard. It's just hard for them. It's just hard. And it's like, I think, we have a phrase, and it hasn't just been here, but this one's definitely landed. And I was reminded of it by a colleague: get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So immutable infrastructure is very uncomfortable if you didn't grow up, in your technology life with that. And then you get it working at a level, and then it's like, oh, and there's a database, right? Oh, and it's a long-lived it's an application that's been in production for 5 to 10 years, and it's a relational database. So it wasn't born out of the cloud, but I mean, this was a lot harder a few years ago when we started at one of my clients doing immutable infrastructure on Azure 1.0 and Windows, okay? And trying to get that to work. Some might have called it a fool's errand, but in the end, it delivered all kinds of value, and that opened up a lot of other gateways for us and cleaned up a lot of things. So the CIO at that point was he was all in. It was burn the boats, right? So there was no choice for the execution layer, and we took it forward. But if we had made him a recommendation, it would have been to not do it, right? That would have been the recommendation. But he didn't ask for a recommendation. He gave a directive. And so I think it takes courageous leadership, and that's what's so nice working at places like, at SAP and places like SAP, where people will make hard directive calls, and that keeps people moving forward and not, being seduced to go back to the what they're used to, right? So it's hard to want to go and continually change. So I think it goes back to DevOps again, continuous improvement and Agile, and some of those things are lean, or obviously I lean heavily towards Agile, Lean, Scrum, and then more importantly, wider like DevOps, and what that actually means. These are not new ideas, but they're new to people hearing them, and they're rebranded. But that idea of continuous improvement, continually challenging yourself, that's the mantra, that's the culture that's got to do that. And probably not everything can make it immutable, but a lot more could, by a wide margin. So my challenge back would be, what's preventing you from being immutable, and what are you going to do about it? Because the benefit is the agility and all kinds of other cost efficiency, and just getting people not having to deal with all the old toil. So Drucker quote would be like, is this how we would do it if we were starting our business today? If the answer is no, what are you going to do about it to open that opportunity up? And without a plan, people just keep doing it.
So got a couple questions coming in from the audience already, and two of them are right on this point. Michelle, I'm going to throw the first one out at you if it's okay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Bruce says, if you're going to kill suspicious pods immediately, what do you do to collect the forensic data from them?
Oh, that's a good point. And so, yeah, you need, I mean, you're logging something to compare, right? You have a baseline, you've determined sort of what is good, and now something's come in that's doesn't match, right? So at that moment that you are capturing that information, you're going to retain that. So you're going to know where it came from, any agent of action, what was the specific or suspicious process that was launched, where was it launched, what time was it launched, where did it come from, etc. So you will have all that information, and that will be retained, and in the meantime, the system is launching a new one. So it's a great point. People worry about that aspect, but those logs can retain even if that little bit of the infrastructure has been killed for security's sake.
Right. So you have real-time observability, real-time forensics, and that don't rely on the workload item, node or pod in this case, being alive when you look at it. So you have to, it's like the story of the pod lives on past the pod, right? And so that's a big shift, because if you lose a VM in a in a VMware cluster or something, you might not get anything off of it, or you might try to like snapshot it, or maybe you can't get it to boot up again. Who knows what happened? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting traumatized thinking of previous lives, but that's the concept of assume you're never going to be on the item. And what that enables for the application engineers and even QA a little bit, and definitely production support, is they can participate in some of this triage and offer different insights. So, every application is going to hit the mat. It's how you get back up and meet your service level objectives. And the goal isn't 100% uptime for every service. I mean, I'm sure Google could do that on certain things in AWS, but they don't do that because there's a concept of error budget and allowing you to be more aggressive moving forward. And so there's a lot of nuances to how you attack this, but definitely that's a big concept, and that has to get reframed and thought through, and you really need your engineers to talk through it and figure out what that means. The pod can go away and they will figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's almost, on its face, it's an obvious question, but when you peel the onion back a couple layers, you see, I think it's something we could handle easily, not easily.
Oh, here's a gotcha. Then you find out the application doesn't log the standard out.
Well, then that's a whole nother story.
And then it's going to a file, and we got to get the application team involved. And then it shows you all the sins if you want to get philosophical about it.
So, Michael, our next question kind of goes in that vein, and it's from a fellow named Kevin, and he sounds like a brother from another mother to you here, in that he says, I'm feeling running after the developers, cleaning up their misconfigs. Or I'm feeling that all I do is run after the developers, cleaning up their misconfigs. Did you experience the same thing, that security is coming in late into the design, planning, deployment phase?
Absolutely. I mean, there's two value streams. Well, so there's I don't exactly love this quote, but I'll use it. It's like, enjoy the suck. I think there's a more optimistic way to say, I get to help developers clean up their code and configuration. I get to be the one that helps. And so there's just a part of it of, I think it could be challenging when their priority doesn't match yours, right? So if their priority is delivering features, your priority is making sure it can run securely and in a cost-efficient way, and that those roles are kind of split, you can have a problem there. So I think the more people can communicate, what I find the best is the more those relationships are communicated with no blame. And even though you're hard conversation, like, we're going to need to get this done. I hear you, and we're going to need to get it done. I really like you, and we're going to need to get it done. And we're both committed to this. And so it drives back towards value stream. The value's towards the customer. The customer needs that config cleaned up. And so if the person's in control of it is on the development side, it might suggest something right or wrong with your architecture. It might not, it might be fine, but they're in that equation. Their code is also, needs to be secure. And so the priority of, a typical application developer versus what it is for the sales and business is not usually in full alignment. And so it exposes a lot of that. And again, I'm going to come back to it. It's a DevOps concept of having the people in the room more and more earlier. That's where I think the shift left is. It's the conversation. Who's at the table? Shift that left. The further you do that, the earlier. It's awkward at first. We've all been to our first junior high dance. It goes fine eventually. But then people kind of get into a cadence and they're kind of moving all in the same direction. And then the priorities kind of balance out where they should.
Fair enough. Michelle, this next question, and I don't mean to jump into our questions, but they're coming in from the audience.
No, it's good. Let's take care of them.
Conversation moving. This next question, Michelle, is really a StackRock specific question. And
okay.
What Michael talked and you both talked about, even from a deleted container or a replaced container, we still can grab the logs and so forth. Can we deliver the StackRock's logs into a SIM tool such as a Splunk or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Michael talked about this from a system standpoint of like, get to the point where things are happening and you don't have to log in to do things. You're just going to do things over here and then the right stuff's going to happen over here. We feel that way sometimes about the StackRock's platform itself. There's aspects of it that are super useful to do in the UI. The risk prioritization, for example, super useful in the UI. But there's a lot of stuff that you're totally going to want to live in the pane of glass you're already living in. So we integrate with Splunk, with Sumo, with PagerDuty, things like that, because we recognize this stuff only works, right? If the whole notion is how we're going to operationalize security, it's got to work the way you're already working. It's got to work in a DevOps way. It's got to work in the tooling that you're already using. So absolutely, this information.
I agree with you. And I think, people sometimes will look at the title of this and say, well, what do you mean by operationalize, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is one of the key pieces of it, is it has to fit into my infrastructure that I've already invested a lot into and that everyone's using and we're using. I don't need yet another UI.
Exactly.
Another alerting or messaging. I want it to work with what I got.
Hold on. I got to check you on that. I got to check. All right. I'm going to give you a quote Steve Jobs always liked. His favorite sports star was Wayne Gretzky. And Gretzky said he was successful because he would skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it had been. And so the traditional mindset is going to go towards where the industry has been. So you have to make your investment before the puck has actually moved. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, and I think it works if you have a team full of Wayne Gretzkys.
You only need one Gretzky. You only need one.
There's only one Gretzky. I borrowed his sand wedge once, but I'll tell you that story offline. But anyway, but no, I mean the fact is, and you first of all, inertia in large organizations is hard to overcome, and there is significant investment in their existing tools. And and we started this thing. People have to recognize that what worked pre-containers isn't going to work necessarily in the container world as well. And when even what worked in phase one of your container rollout may not necessarily work really well in an orchestrated container environment using Kubernetes. And you've got to, you got to know when to cut bait, right? And when to move on, obviously. But you don't want to throw good babies out with the bathwater either. And I think that's one of the things.
I think Google is famous for that, right? Like you get promoted if you kill like 3 projects.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if you get promoted, but let me ask you another. I got another question here.
Google, so I can speculate.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to. I've got to be Switzerland here, Michael. But our next question sounds like it's a Michelle Stackrocks question. But I'm going to ask Michael for you to go first, and then Michelle, if you don't mind, if you can kind of chime in on it. Michael, can you describe the placement of Stackrocks vis-a-vis other vendor solutions in this arena? Yeah. As different from the vendor solutions.
Well, that's funny. You make me go first. Sure. So the way I see the industry, there's a lot of territory. There's a lot of earth, right? And the companies that are in the groupings or grouped together with Stackrocks are all cloud native or hybrid cloud, right? So they're going to be in that general segment. And they've positioned themselves in different areas, right? And this is similar to like how the hyperscalers position themselves. So Stackrocks has a clean Kubernetes-native focus as a focal point, whereas the other big names I'm aware of have centered their focus on the container as their first focal point. And that's how I see the difference. I hope I'm close to accurate, or it could be interesting. But
no, I certainly think you are, and sometimes that difference can sound kind of theoretical and conceptual and not super crucial. So just to what does that mean to somebody like Michael trying to use these systems, or anybody trying to deploy it at scale? Developers don't think in containers, and they don't think in individual vulnerabilities and things like that, right? You're taking a systemic look. You're looking at a deployment perspective. You're looking at things by roles and responsibilities in the org. So maybe I'm responsible for certain namespaces, things like that. And so, again, as we started off the discussion, security, the framework of security really needs to match the framework of the infrastructure. And as we've moved from a container-centric way of organizing our systems to a Kubernetes-centric perspective, security needs to match that. And so it is, it's how you frame things. It's understanding the risk across that landscape versus just the container landscape. It's having the controls. Like if you live at the container level, there's nothing in a container that you can do from the standpoint of control, right? You have to have external control that acts on that container. But if you have a Kubernetes,
you just describe, if you focus on the container, then you're going to introduce another external actor that can do interventions into my system.
Exactly.
And now I don't understand what that thing's capable of. Now, am I paying a so this is how I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay this vendor to put something inside my system that's going to make interventions that I don't really have visibility of, like at even a conceptual level, like that. To me, that's uncomfortable. So sorry.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I think you're right, because again, if Coop is capable of something, if Coop is capable of killing pods, doing admission controllers, segmenting traffic, why wouldn't you use Coop, right? Because then everybody in Michael's organization is looking at the same version of reality. Everybody's seeing the same source of truth because everybody's living in a Coop world. And all those controls stay in Coop. So, Coop won for a whole bunch of reasons, capability reasons, but one of its powers is to act as that universal layer, right? You could be hybrid, you could be multi-cloud. The consistency, the common glue is going to be Coop. So you want truth and controls and policies to all live there so that they always are in your infrastructure. Because again, if it's some magic, hand operating over here, Where did that hand go everywhere your infrastructure went? Did it go to every cloud? Does anybody have visibility into that hand? It really is challenging.
Yeah, I have this nightmare I had once of we're down and I'm having to write an RCA. I try to explain it and go, well, we couldn't figure out what the security system was doing. So we were down for much longer. And so I'm like, okay, how do I get my team or the group I'm a part of, how do I get them leveled up? If they know Kubernetes to a high degree, like I love the Linux Foundation's CCAD and CKA, they've been through that grinder, and when the when the lights are on, when the sirens are literally blaring inside, during a production event at certain places that we had sirens, right? And like, what are these people going to do? They're going to go to what they know. They're going to be able to look at that. You're going to have the people on the call. And when I have an unknown actor in my system, that looks like a bad idea to me. It just like, I'm like, I don't know if I like that. I don't know. I don't know if I like that. Sorry to drive into that point.
You know what, Michael? I don't think that's unusual. And it's just me. I am. So one of the lessons I've learned in 20 years plus years of cybersecurity is people don't embrace change so well, right? They don't embrace new technology really well, believe it or not. And the idea of an unknown like that is it gives you nightmares, as they say. Michelle, how do we overcome that? What do we do?
Well, Michael talked a lot about changing mindsets, changing practices. Nobody wants to build insecurely. Nobody wants to be unsure of what's happening. And I think, Michael talked about the learning curve, embracing that, growing these in tandem, right? So I don't know how much traditional security teams are going to become Coop experts, but certainly having development teams and DevOps teams becoming more mindful of security and more embracing of security. Michael talked about sitting at the table earlier and earlier in the process. I think that's one of the first things we need to do. We need to cross-pollinate. And, selfishly speaking, here at StackRox, we think we've built a platform that really helps that cross-pollination and helps DevOps and security to collaborate more. Again, the guardrails for developers and the, putting the onus on security to not just like, hey, you got 39 instances of this vulnerability, go fix them. Like, that's not practical either. So what if we gave security some tools to make them more relevant in a Coop world? Like, hey, we got this thing 39 times. That's kind of a bummer, but these first 3, they're really important. And here's why: because it's open to the internet and it's on a production system, not a test system, and something's running privileged. And, let's enrich how security can present risk in a more nuanced way, in a more reasonable way. And I think
prioritize it. I mean, because Michelle, underlying all this is the realization, and Michael, I assume you agree as well. The realization is that we'll never get to all 39 of those things.
That's right.
Here's how I would say it. It's a business mindset. Peter Drucker, we do the most important thing first and don't worry about the second. Now, I don't want to say those other 36 aren't important. However, and this is tough for most security people, we're not shutting down the business, okay? We're not shutting it down. We have to keep it moving forward and continue to move forward. And so we have to be pragmatic about where we put our efforts. The grass is greener where you put the water. So we don't have unlimited water supply.
Yeah.
So, and we have to keep making it more secure than it was the day before and more cost effective and deliver it faster with higher agility. So getting out of the mindset we can just throw a bunch of, a report of things that need to be remediated at a group and assume that's going to somehow help the customer, which is the business and indirectly the end users, isn't doing a service to the org the way where it needs to be for the organizations that are going to really thrive in this current and next generation of technology that we're in. And businesses will continue to want to take advantage of opportunity windows, which keep getting shorter and shorter, or smaller and smaller, more narrow. And so you got to be able to hit the shots.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Guys, we're running low on time, and I do have Andrew from the audience has asked a good question here. Michael, probably more up your alley, but Michelle and I may have chime in. What are the chances of having modern web attacks like server-side request forgery attacks, SSRF, happening, and happening to a modern cloud-native infrastructure with containers and Kubernetes, obviously?
You get it configured wrong, probably pretty high, I would guess.
Yeah.
Right? Like if.
But is that one? I guess the underlying thesis there is. So if we configure it right, that's what Kubernetes helps us, right? We have this sort of
Kubernetes is putting through a grinder. Being able to serve it out in Kubernetes in a reasonable way, passing even basic metrics, suggests some level of holistic health.
That's what I'm trying to say is we almost can take care of that kind of baseline nonsense.
Still mess it up, but it's much. I mean, look, you put somebody through like a CCAT, if they can survive that proctored exam, you'll be fine. All that easy, like that stuff kind of goes away, I think is a reasonable assumption or hypothesis, I guess.
Michelle, here's my $64 million question for you.
Okay.
How many people have Kubernetes? I'm sorry. How many people have Kubernetes configured correctly?
Oh, I can't tell you. We were in just we were in just a POC, right? Not even a customer. So we take about 15-20 minutes to deploy, and about 15 minutes after that, you start seeing stuff, right? We have a risks dashboard, for example, and one of the guys pulled up the network segmentation map, and he's like, "Oh, your tool is like way off because this is not what our YAMLs look like." We're like, "Oh, yeah, that please, let's dig in and let's troubleshoot this. Maybe we're reading something wrong. Let's dig in." So directly in our tool, you can actually pull up the YAML. And so we're like, okay, so here's what we're mapping. So something look wrong. Is this not the right? And they're like, oh my God, our YAMLs are not right. And they had no idea until they saw it pictorially, because YAMLs are kind of hard to, they make sense, but as a friend was joking the other day, pull out your ruler and make sure all your indents are right, right? And so just like that, they were completely sure their segmentation was right, and it wasn't. So this stuff happens all the time. Everybody's moving so fast, and Michael's right. It's all about the business. We're doing this cloud native stack to drive the business, and that has to win. So how do you have that win in a way that still protects your assets and protects your apps and data? So it happens all the time. There's always this aha moment when they see the risk dashboard and the network page where they're like, I had no idea we were building stuff like that.
It's eye-opening, typically.
It is. Guys, we're at the top of the hour. We have another question or two, but we'll try to get to them written. I saved this comment that came in just a few minutes ago from Robert, and I wanted to end the webinar with this. Robert said, great speakers, great webinar. First one this year, thank you. I can't say it any better. Michelle, Michael, thank you.
Thank you. It was a really fun discussion. Michael, great to see you again.
Happy to join. Enjoyed it.
We'll do it again.
Indeed.
All right.
Thanks.
Everyone, thanks for spending your time with us. If you're watching this on, not live, but on demand, I guess is the word. Thanks for watching it on demand as well. Unfortunately, we can't ask questions live over our speakers, but if you do go over to StackRox, and Michelle, the URL is?
www.stackrocks.com, stack and then ROX.
And that's stack, STACK-ROX.
That's right.
You can maybe pose your question. They'll get it to Michelle there, and she can reach out to Michael. I want to thank Michael, Michelle. Thank everyone for joining. Until the next webinar, this is Alan Schimmel for Media Ops. Thanks for having us today, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.